Assalamualaikum and good greetings. So today we'll be watching a video titled The Reliability of the New Testament Introduction. So this will be the first video out of a series of video that is specifically about the reliability of the New Testament. Hope to learn something new today. Without further ado, let's watch.
Can we trust the New Testament as a reliable document? Many skeptics say no, and that it is based on dated copies and filled with errors. But what does the evidence say? Christians for centuries have pointed to the evidence that we can trust the New Testament is reliable to what it originally said. So what evidence can we offer? Well, when it comes to an ancient document, the more manuscripts we have, the better.
Okay, so the premise first. How reliable it is back to the original writing, right? And because normally from me, my question is, how do you say with confidence that this is indeed from God, or based on the claim from the Bible, how do you be confident that this is indeed inspired by God? Because if it is a good document that can be tied to the original writing, but you do not know for sure that the person that originally write is indeed inspired by God or guided by God or something, then still, even if it is a very reliable document tied to that person, if I don't trust that person, I will still not put my faith on this document to be, a source for my salvation, etc. So I'm not sure whether this whole, series will be just to tie this to the original writer or beyond. We'll see.
That way there is more to cross-check for accuracy and identify changes that may have happened through the process known as textual criticism. So we would obviously want more to compare with so we can get back to the original. So what do we have of the New Testament? Of the original language of the New Testament, we've over 5,800 Greek manuscripts. In Latin, we've over 10,000 manuscripts.
So okay, pardon my ignorance, but which is of this is the original document, the original language? Is Latin the translation from an earlier one? And is the Greek the original one? New Testament should be from Jesus, right? Or those who, directly in contact with Jesus. Why is it in Greek?
In various other languages, we have between 5,000 and 10,000 manuscripts.
Why is there a range? Double, meaning 5 to 10,000?
So we have an extremely wide variety of New Testament manuscripts from across the ancient world we can study and compare. And with
okay.
more manuscripts, the more accurate we will be at reconstructing the original through textual criticism.
The more accurate we will be, okay. So the level of accuracy that we are concerned about now, right? Not really whether this is from God.
But even if we didn't have any manuscripts, we would still have the entire New Testament preserved in the writings of the Church Fathers. It is estimated there are over 1 million New Testament quotes in the Church Fathers alone.
What does that mean? Meaning not in terms of writing?
If there was a large amount of intentional or accidental corruption of the text, then it would be easy to trace by comparing manuscripts of different regions.
There was never a time when any one man or group of men had control over the text of the New Testament. There was never a Christian Uthman. All assertions regarding adding doctrines, changing theology, removing teachings, etc. are without merit. The Christian church was a persecuted minority without power to enforce a uniform textual transmission, as in Islam.
This is far more than any other ancient document. The second most widely attested would be Homer's Iliad, with only 1,757 copies, and then Suetonius, with around 200 copies. So if one is still skeptical of the New Testament after knowing of how widely attested it is, then they should be even more skeptical of other ancient works. As scholar Dan Wallace says,
they have never thought about this other ancient literature and reflecting on what that would be like. If I'm going to be skeptical about the New Testament and I apply that skepticism to other ancient Greco-Roman literature, guess what? We immediately go back into the Dark Ages.
How is that how is that? Okay, is the whole concept here is comparative to, you know, just any literature from history, ancient history? Because that is one discussion. I do understand, meaning that we want to, you know, to evaluate how this is accurate to the ancient writing. Fine. But it is, for me at least, it is far different, significantly different, or fundamentally different. And when we want to say that, how do we make sure that this is indeed a verified message from God? That is totally different story. I wouldn't compare with any random literature from ancient history.
We've eclipsed all knowledge in the last 500 years.
But not only do we have a large amount of manuscripts, but
Because it's not just about any knowledge, any, you know, whatever knowledge they get from back then. It is about our salvation, basically.
we have very early complete manuscripts and even earlier fragments. The oldest complete New Testament
Very early complete manuscript and very earlier pieces like this. That is interesting.
is within 300 years of the original, the closest of any ancient document.
So yeah, again, the context here is within the context of document, right? Meaning that 300 years from this to the source. So how do we know this is accurate to the source? That's normally my question, because perhaps we have in Islam the hadith, science of hadith, etc. So maybe that is influencing my view on others, especially when we talk about, you know, message from God.
But we have even earlier witnesses and fragments, like this one, P52, from between 90 AD to 125 AD, and others like these, from approximately 170 AD to 220 AD. We also have a larger fragment from around this time in P75, which has 102 survived pages from Luke and John. Comparing this to other ancient documents, the earliest copy of the Iliad is far off with 500 years from its original, and Suetonius is 800 years from its original.
What is this Iliad in Suetonius, and how is it relevant? I'm assuming it's normally it's a benchmark for ancient document, is it?
As you can see, the New Testament is by far the closest to its original than any other ancient document. So if we are to be skeptical of the New Testament, then we should be even more skeptical of other ancient literature.
For this question, my answer is yes. I'm skeptical for the New Testament, and I'm far more skeptical with any other ancient literature.
In fact, we have about a dozen fragmented manuscripts dating to around the 2nd century, which represent about 40% of the entire New Testament.
So meaning the 43% of New Testament is we have high confidence on it. Is it what this implies to?
And we have 120 manuscripts, around 300 years from the original, which is incredible compared to other ancient documents. But despite this, some scholars still argue the New Testament copies are too late and full of errors. The leading critic Bart Ehrman says, "Not only do we not have the originals, we don't have the first copies of the originals. We don't even have copies of the original, or copies of copies of copies of the originals. What we have are copies made later, much later, and these copies all differ from one another in many thousands of places." Well, this seems like an odd thing to say, given the evidence we just discussed.
Is it contradictory? Because the video says that this is meaning that what?
The places. Well, this seems like an odd thing to say, given the evidence we just discussed.
This is odd thing to say given the evidence. So is it countering the statement by Bart Ehrman there? Meaning, is it actually by showing that this, I don't know, P90, P104, etc., it counter that no, this is actually copy of a copy, etc. Or how is it odd? Maybe I'm missing something.
So let's divide his objection into two parts and deal with each appropriately. The first is that our earliest manuscripts are extremely far off from the originals, not even copies of copies of copies of the originals.
Okay.
Well, this doesn't make sense, considering our earliest fragment is within 70 years or less of the original.
So it doesn't make sense that copy of a copy, because it's 70 years. Meaning that in 70 years, logically it's just a copy of, or a copy of copy of. Is that the logic applied here?
And several larger fragments are around 150 years from the original.
So 150 years from the original, it should be a copy of a copy. I'm trying to understand the logic here, because it says as if that statement is odd. So is it that, oh, it's 150 years, separating from the original to this one that we have. So why are you saying it's not a copy of a copy? Is that what this is saying? What is the normal? Because even especially when we talk about ancient manuscript, right? It's not like a printed factory, etc. I would assume. In just few years, it can already be a copy of copy, right?
So why would these not be first or second generation copies of the originals? A papyrus manuscript.
So it's based on assumption, meaning that this video is saying that Bart Ehrman is making an assumption, and why shouldn't we assume the other way around?
In public use will last on average for more than 100 years. There is also no reason to assume the originals or first generation copies were copied once and thrown away or lost. In fact, Ehrman even acknowledges that a manuscript can likely be a direct copy of one from 100 years prior to it.
Every time somebody translates the Bible, they don't say, well, I've got to take this manuscript that I translated from and destroy that now. That's stupid. We don't do that. It's never been done in the history of the church.
There is no reason to assume the originals were just copied once and forgotten, or that scribes only had one copy to pull from. In fact, early church father Tertullian even seems to suggest the originals were still around when he was writing at the end of the 2nd century.
He seems to suggest. What does that mean? He seems to suggest?
Come now, you who would indulge a better curiosity, if you would apply it to the business of your salvation, run over to the apostolic churches, in which the very thrones of the apostles are still preeminent in their places, in which their own authentic writings are read. The Latin word for authentic normally refers to original documents, so it appears Tertullian is saying the originals were still in the churches to that day. He specifically refers to the letters of Corinthians, Philippians, Thessalonians, Ephesians, and Romans, and urges readers to visit these places to see the authentic writings for themselves.
This part of the Bible, right? But not the Gospel, is it? Part of the New Testament, but not part of the Gospel. Meaning letters to so and so.
Even if Tertullian didn't mean the original scrolls the apostles wrote on, his testimony still tells us the Christians in his days were concerned with having accurate writings, and they were not discarding their copies as valueless, as skeptics suggest. And it's reasonable to suggest that if the manuscripts were read often, they were also copied often. And in fact, the amount of manuscripts we have today,
if it's copied often, then it's isn't it by definition? Then it's a copy. Even though in the same, because when we talk about manuscript, right? Or how do we define the same manuscript? Is it that in the same generation, if I copy and then my friend copy for me, I said copy, that is understood as the same manuscript, or that's understood already as a copy of a copy of a copy? Because maybe the way I understand is wrong. When I say copy of a copy, is like copy of a copy, right? Then it can be like even in few years, there's already copy of a copy compared to the original actual writing.
obviously suggests that. Ehrman's reasoning seems to imply New Testament copying was like a game of telephone, where a 4th century copy is a copy from one from a 3rd century, which in turn is a copy of one from the 2nd century, which is a copy of one from the 1st century, which was a copy of the original. But there is no reason to suggest the originals or the first copies were simply lost after they were copied once. Scribes could always go back to the earliest copies of their day that had survived and simply copy that. St. Irenaeus even tested.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Meaning that someone copy and someone copy from then, but someone else can still go to the access to the original one and copy. Meaning that it's not a copy of a copy of copy in that chain, but it's a copy of the original, right? Yeah, that's a valid point.
Testifies he had access to some of the earliest copies of the Book of Revelations, suggesting early copies were being preserved for accuracy in transmission. and the testimony of early church fathers indicates how sacred they consider these documents, so they were not carelessly being copied, but being held in high regard to preserve the faith passed down from the apostles. In fact, scholars Darrell Bock and Dan Wallace note the earliest manuscripts we have probably go back to around 100 AD. Two of the oldest manuscripts we have, Papyrus 75 or P75 and Codex Vaticanus or B, have an exceptionally strong agreement.
What does that mean, exceptionally strong agreement? Is it like 85% in agreement to each other, or 90% in agreement with each other? What does exceptionally strong agreement mean?
And they are among the most accurate manuscripts that exist today. P75 is about 125 years older than B, yet it is not an ancestor of B. Instead, B was copied from an earlier manuscript of P75. See the detailed work of C.L. Porter. The combination of these two manuscripts in a particular reading must surely go back to the very beginning of the 2nd century. So the idea that our copies are far too late doesn't stand up to evidence, and textual criticism demonstrates we are not too far off from the originals.
We're not too far off from the original. Interesting.
So what about Ehrman's other claim, that all other manuscripts have much variation and differ from one another in thousands of places? Ehrman and other skeptics will usually throw out the fact that there are 400,000 variants across New Testament manuscripts, which is in fact true. However, when you look at the details, this isn't a big deal. For example, the reason we have so many variants is because we have so many manuscripts. That would be expected with such a high number of manuscripts. But even with that, remember we have close to 6,000 New Testament Greek manuscripts, which comes to about 2.6 million pages of New Testament. If you do the math, that is one variant per 6.5 pages. Not really that much. Second,
Okay, I guess this is where, for a Muslim, then it stop here, right? Because, yeah, we understand. I'm not talking about from the perspective of others. I do understand that from textual criticism of ancient manuscript. Of course, there's a ceiling of level of confidence that we can go or reach, because there are always certain level of uncertainties that we cannot really jump. So relative to other manuscript, then I do understand then, listening to this, that why some Christians says that this is like the highest level of confidence that we can have, because they are talking relative to ancient manuscript, while the Muslim cannot understand that, because we are talking about there cannot be even any variation, possible variation, etc., right? But I guess Muslims do not understand that Christians do not hold the Bible as literal word of God. Hence, the variation does not necessarily mean it is significant, or is it deviate from the message, right? So that's the difference, I think, right? Because most of portion of Bible is like hadith, and in hadith, we can have some variation, meaning that from two chain of narration, sometimes there are small variation that still hold up, that still is very much saying the same thing, but the variation in terms of the wording. So along the chain of narration, something happened, but the level of confidence between the memory of each individuals, etc., the character of each individuals, and the variation is so small that it is significant, we can accept that. But that is for hadith. But for Quran, that's like, that small variation is too much of a variation to consider that this is word of God. I think the thing from Muslim is that we always assume that the Bible is parallel to the Quran. But I think more accurately, we put it parallel to the hadith, and then we can say, okay, then we can put things into perspective.
What kinds of variants are there? Well, 75% of them are simply spelling errors, which do not affect the meaning of the text.
Yeah. Spelling error that do not affect the meaning of the text. So it's like hadith, right? Meaning in terms of the hadith, even though we still look into why this word is being used, right? But still, that variation do not really take away from the whole meaning. While in the Quran, the selection of every single word, we mean it because it gives meaning, and istinbat hukum, etc., can go back to actual choice of words that God choose to use. So that kind of variation will skew things up, right? But in the hadith, yeah. So
15% are variation in Greek synonyms and transpositions, which cannot even be translated. About 9%
what does that mean? It cannot even be translated, meaning that from one language to another language, that there are certain things that cannot be translated into another language. I think that's similar to meaning when we go to tafsir of Quran, right, or translation of the Quran, because some phrases in the original language you cannot really translate into another language. It will be one paragraph to make people understand that one phrase. So yeah, that happened. But in Islam, that is considered separate, right? Translation and the Quran itself is considered separate.
9% do affect the meaning of the text, but they are from very late documents, and obviously resolved by looking at earlier manuscripts. Then,
so that means that it is acknowledged that when copy, including change of language, that can happen.
Less than 1% do actually affect the meaning of the text and are from early manuscripts.
Only less than 1% that actually do affect. Meaning that there will be that 1% or less than 1% that will be highly contentious, right? Meaning that even within Christianity, if someone brings that verse, because it has meaning affected, it may have some dispute. I'm not sure whether that verse is about something central or not.
But none of these variants actually challenge or affect essential Christian doctrines. As Bart Ehrman,
yeah, so that's the. I'm not sure based on this claim, because I'll just take whatever is as presumably true, meaning that all those variants is not about verses that construct the main belief, right? Even though the rest, if okay, we are less confident of this verse, etc., but it doesn't affect the belief. Interesting. Of course, for Muslim, you cannot. This is hard to understand, right? Because, yeah, just like, for example, many Christians challenge some verses in the Quran about scientific, supposedly scientific error or something. I think no Muslim will say something like this, but it doesn't really affect the main doctrine, because if one mistake happen anywhere, then it can be challenged that this whole thing, how can this is being from God? But of course, Christians do not make that such claim, hence this is acceptable, right?
even admits, the position I argue for in misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament.
This is the guy on whose works Muslims and atheists are basing their wild claims that the Orthodox have so corrupted the text that it must not have been Orthodox at all originally. They don't know what they're talking about.
Maybe I do not discount or put away that some, maybe including some Muslim that make some claim. But Muslim that I'm familiar with, they are not making this claim per se. They are saying that how can we put our faith in a document that we cannot fully, confidently say this is indeed from God as a whole. So that is the more familiar argument that I'm familiar with. That's the more, the argument that I'm more familiar with, which is totally different than this.
But they're basing it on Dr. Ehrman's work. He does know what he's talking about. I happen to disagree with him about a number of things, but I don't disagree with him over this. In fact, in our 3 debates, at the end of each debate, I say, by the way, I think you agree with me, Bart, that essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants. And I put this screen up. He's never disputed it. He said it. It's in print. He can't deny himself.
There is absolutely no evidence to suggest Christian doctrines are affected by variants in the manuscripts, and there is next to zero evidence to suggest we cannot get back to the originals. In fact, given all the evidence, there are only 40 lines of the New Testament unresolved by textual criticism, giving it an accurate...
What does that mean? Meaning that even though you find everything, you cannot really resolve whether this is this or that or what. Is that what it mean?
Received 99.5%, which by far is the best of any ancient document. Now obviously, there is still debate over what a handful of passages were originally, and no Christian scholar argues we have exactly word for word what the original authors wrote. But in light of this evidence,
So that is interesting. Now, of course, there's two layers here. One layer is discussion whether what we have now is exactly what the original writer wrote. So yeah, what is being discussed in this video. The other discussion is whether what is originally written here even is a valid thing that we should accept. Right? That's my contention is that. So if any question want to say about this, about we have high confidence about this is being what exactly is being written by this guy or whoever that wrote each portion of the Bible or New Testament. My question is not that really. My question is, how do we know what this guy is writing or have wrote is exactly what God endorsed? That's my personal issue with the Bible, be it Old Testament or New Testament. Right? I don't really concerned about this, because if you have strong argument to say that this is why we are confident that this whatever this guy wrote is actually endorsed by God, then I will how to say, be interested in this. Just like why I'm confident that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is sent by God, right? So the chain from God to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is established. Then I'm very confident, I'm very intrigued or interested to know this, right? Meaning that whether this sahih or da'if, etc., right? Meaning the chain of narration, etc. How confident I am with this particular one based on the chain, etc. So this, my interest in this is only come after this is established. But if I don't even know who actually wrote this portion of the Bible, and how do we know God endorsed him, why should I be interested in this? Even if you can say that it's 100% accurate, this guy is what this guy wrote, we have 100% accuracy, but why should it matter to me, right? So that's my personal point of view.
we should also avoid radical skepticism that we can certainly never know anything of what the original authors wrote. It simply doesn't stand up to evidence. The overwhelming amount of scriptural passages aren't even debated, and there is no textual evidence that threatens the origins of essential Christian doctrines. So is the New Testament reliable? The obvious answer is yes, and we have barely scratched the surface of evidence.
The onus is
What does it mean by reliable? I think it means that linked to the original author, right? Because for me, is it reliable, for example, as a source of my faith? My question of reliability is, how do you establish the connection between the author and God?
is on the skeptic. The New Testament sets the standard in providing clear evidence of its trustworthiness. If that is not enough, is it possible the skeptic has set a standard that is unreasonable? And if so, why?
Alright, so that is interesting, and yeah, I have made my position clear based on all my comments throughout watching this. Feel free to give your inputs to clarify on whatever questions that I have raised. We'll go in the next video, continuation from this one. This is, I think there's like 7 set of videos that is with the context of the reliability of the New Testament. So inshallah, hopefully I'll watch all of it, inshallah, God willing. So with that, see you in the next video, inshallah. Thank you for watching. See you next time.